Brought to you by the Dark Lord himself, Qezi Ali. For 1,000 years, people traveled to Egypt to see a structure they described as the greatest wonder of the ancient world. They called it the Labyrinth, and they said it was so massive it made the pyramids look small. Not a metaphor. A literal stone complex the size of a small city, built to swallow your sense of direction and make you feel trapped inside geometry. Hawara sits at the edge of the Fayum oasis, about 50 miles south of Cairo. Today it looks like rubble, sand, and a tired pyramid that looks more like a scar than a monument. But 4,000 years ago this place was alive, and at the center of it was a structure so huge that multiple empires kept writing about it like they'd just seen a miracle. And here's the part that matters. This wasn't one rumor. It wasn't one traveler exaggerating. Different eras, different languages, different cultures, and they all describe the same thing in the same location with the same signature features. Herodotus goes there around 450 BC. He's guided by priests through the upper structure, and he describes thousands of rooms linked by corridors that twist and branch like a living organism. He says it was beyond human ability, and he openly states it surpassed the pyramids. Herodotus describes 12 massive courts, each tied to a regional division of Egypt. That means the labyrinth wasn't just a temple, it was a governing machine. A stone representation of administration, power, religion, and control, laid out in a way that made the country itself feel like it had a heartbeat. Then he hears about the lower chambers, and the priests refuse to show him. That refusal is the first red flag and the biggest clue, because the lower levels are the entire point. The labyrinth is not just something you walk through, it's something they protect. Herodotus says the Egyptians told him the underground chambers held the kings who built it, and the sacred crocodiles. Those weren't random details, those were gatekeeping details. They were telling him, politely, that below a certain line, the labyrinth stopped being public and started being forbidden. 4 centuries later, Strabo shows up. The labyrinth is still there, still in use, still so confusing that nobody gets in or out without a guide. But Strabo notices something that hits like a punch to the chest, because it implies a construction scale that doesn't match casual storytelling. Strabo describes the roof as made of a single stone concept, stone on stone, no timber scaffolding logic. He's describing an engineered ceiling that feels like it's floating, a slab whirled above your head. Whether he meant one stone or an unbroken field of stone, the point is the same. The roof construction stunned him. Then Diodorus Siculus writes about it. Pliny the Elder writes about it. And Pliny makes the statement that sets the hierarchy. The famous Greek labyrinth is a cheap copy, a tiny imitation, a fraction of the Egyptian original. The ancient world knew where the real labyrinth was, and they knew it wasn't a myth. So for centuries, the labyrinth sits in the historical record like a mountain you can't ignore. Then time does what time does. The site gets looted. The stone gets quarried. The above-ground structure gets dismantled. The desert moves in. The water table rises. The visible labyrinth disappears and the modern world starts doing what it always does when it loses something. It calls it a legend. But the earth doesn't delete buildings. The earth buries them. That's how reality works when you measure it on the scale of centuries, not the scale of a human lifespan. It's like entropy in slow motion, the arrow of time pushing everything toward ruin, while the sand quietly turns history into a sealed archive. Then in 1888, the world's most famous archaeologist arrives at Hawara. Flinders Petrie wasn't a tourist with a notebook. He was a razor. He helped invent the methods archaeologists still use, and he came to Hawara chasing the tomb of Amenemhat III. What he found was a death trap. The pyramid wasn't stable stone like the Great Pyramids at Giza, it was mud brick held together by sand, and it collapsed like a living thing trying to eat him. Petrie spent months digging, crawling, and fighting tunnels that kept dying under his hands. At one point, he gets pinned in a passage so tight he can't breathe, and his candle goes out. He's trapped in a coffin of darkness with millions of pounds of pressure above him, and he survives by staying calm long enough to twist free when a worker behind him drops a match. Then Petrie goes right back in. He finds trap systems, false passages, sliding stones, and engineered misdirection designed to break intruders. He reaches the burial chamber area, and it's carved from massive quartzite blocks, a precision stone masterpiece that looks like it belongs in a different category than normal mudbrick Egypt. And it's empty. Robbed long before he got there. So Petrie steps back and studies the landscape next to the pyramid, and he sees the remains of something enormous. A foundation field spread across the exact area the ancient writers described. The dimensions match the ancient record. The location matches ancient maps. Petrie realizes what he's standing on, the lost labyrinth of Hawara. Petrie believes he's looking at the foundation of a destroyed megastructure. He thinks the labyrinth is gone, reduced to rubble, and he leaves disappointed. But he missed the most important part of the ancient descriptions, the detail everyone forgets because it changes everything. The labyrinth wasn't only above ground. It went down. Petrie didn't find the foundation. He found the roof. He was standing on the capstone of a multi-level complex buried beneath the sand, because what looked like a flattened ruin was the uppermost layer of a structure still sitting intact below. That's the twist that turns Hawara from a historical curiosity into a live target. And it's exactly why modern scanning technology becomes the moment the myth breaks. In the late 2000s, a European-led team partners with Egyptian scientific authorities and brings advanced ground-penetrating radar to Hawara. They scan the site, and the ground lights up with a grid. Walls. Lines. Right angles. Thick structural partitions beneath the sediment. They detect a massive subsurface pattern about 40 feet down, and it doesn't read like random geology. It reads like architecture. A buried complex with heavy wall signatures laid out in a way that matches what the ancient world kept describing. The press catches it. The story leaks into the public. And then the door slams shut. Because the moment something threatens the official story, the same gatekeeper shows up like a shadow. Zahi Hawass. The face on the magazines, the man with the permits, the man who decides what the world is allowed to touch. Hawass imposes a communications ban. He calls it national security. National security over a 5,000-year-old structure. A phrase so absurd it exposes the real meaning: control. And this is where we stop pretending it's just academic bureaucracy, because Hawass doesn't behave like a neutral scientist. He behaves like an empire manager protecting a timeline. If you step outside his narrative, you don't get applauded for discovery, you get punished for disobedience. That's the pattern. You find something that doesn't fit, you go public, and you get banned. A German engineer sends a robot into a narrow shaft in the Great Pyramid and finds a sealed door. He talks about it, and he gets shut down. Then Hawass appears on camera later, entering the same story, taking the spotlight, controlling the narrative like he discovered it himself. Another researcher follows old notes into a cave system at Giza and reports chambers and passageways. Hawass denies it exists, bans the researcher, then later appears on film entering those same caves. Rules for everyone else, exceptions for the gatekeeper. That's not protection of history. That's ownership of history. So when Hawara lights up on radar, and the world starts asking questions, Hawass does what he always does. He clamps it. He blocks follow-up. He blocks excavation. He blocks public release. He blocks return access, and he makes sure the message is clear. Do not embarrass the timeline. But the data doesn't vanish just because a man gets angry. The scans exist. The reports exist. And when the official release never comes, the researcher involved releases what he has, and the punishment hits the way it always hits in Egypt when you don't bow. Blacklisting. Exile. Career destruction. This is the point where the labyrinth stops being only a story about ancient stone. It becomes a story about modern power. Because if you control the permits, you control reality. If nobody is allowed to dig, then nothing can ever be proven, and the gatekeeper gets to stand there forever saying, there is nothing to see. That's not science. That's a chokehold. Then comes the next layer. The layer that takes Hawara from buried structure to underground system. A private meeting in England. A former military and satellite expert. Synthetic aperture radar aimed at Hawara, the same style of technology used to detect hidden facilities. And the scan doesn't show one buried layer. It shows 4 levels. 4 stacked sections separated by heavy stone, linked by a central corridor, a vertical shaft that runs deep through the complex like a spine. It shows a surrounding moat-like shape, an omega geometry that matches the ancient Egyptian symbol of eternity, the Shen ring, a boundary loop meant to protect what's inside. And then it shows the centerpiece. At the heart of the deepest level, a central hall hundreds of feet long, every level converging toward it like everything was designed to funnel inward. And at the center of that convergence sits an object with a signature that doesn't behave like stone. It reads as metallic. A solid metal anomaly the size of a landmark, buried deep under the earth, positioned exactly at the central node of a 4-level underground complex. Not in a random corner. Not off to the side. In the middle. Where you put the thing that matters most. A ring. A disc. A freestanding structure. A central device. And now the story snaps into focus, because the ancient writers didn't just describe a maze. They described a system with forbidden lower chambers guarded for millennia by priests. A complex that functioned on the surface as administration, but held something deeper that outsiders could never touch. That's not how you protect a normal tomb. That's how you protect a vault. So now we connect Hawara to the spine of our series, because this isn't a standalone mystery. This is the Egyptian endpoint of everything we've been building since Atlantis, the Younger Dryas and the Global Reset, the reshot structure and lost technology. The Younger Dryas. The Flood. The Survivors. The Knowledge. The Archive. Plato tells the Atlantis story around 360 BC and names his source, Egyptian priests. He says Solon heard it from them. And the priests don't speak like poets, they speak like record keepers. They give dates. They give timelines. They talk like custodians of memory. They place the fall of Atlantis around 9600 BC. That date lands like a lightning bolt across the same era the Earth itself records as chaos. The end of the Ice Age. The collapse of ice sheets. The surge of meltwater. The rising seas. The drowning of coastlines. The destruction of entire regions that were once habitable land. This is where our science anchor clicks in, because this is not fantasy. This is physics and geology and deep time. The cosmos begins in a singularity, an impossible density where time itself behaves differently, and from that first fracture the universe expands into a reality where everything is temporary. Gravitational time dilation tells you even time isn't uniform, that reality bends under mass, that the deeper you go into gravity, the slower time flows. And Hawara is literally a gravity vault. A place where the Earth becomes a lock, where the environment stabilizes, where the underground preserves what the surface destroys. And the cosmic background radiation is the oldest light we can still see, a fossil signal from the early universe. It's proof that information can survive across unimaginable spans, if it's insulated well enough. That's the entire point of an archive. That's the entire point of a labyrinth. Now bring it back down to Earth. When sea level rises, it erases coastal worlds. It turns living places into underwater ruins. It forces survivors inland. It forces people into river valleys like the Nile, because those are the arteries of stability when the planet reshapes the map. And that's exactly where Egypt rises. Egypt carries memories of a pre-flood era in its own sacred language. Zep-Tepi, the first time. A world before the dynasties, before the historical kings, a foundational era where beings and builders established sacred architecture on the land. The temple texts at Edfu describe foundations built on top of older foundations, references to cataclysm, to land swallowed by the sea, to sages arriving after disaster carrying knowledge. 7 sages. An island gone. A rebuilding. In this series, Hawara is where that rebuilding becomes physical. Because a civilization that survives a world-ending flood does not rebuild by guessing. It rebuilds by preserving what it knows. It hides the operating manual. That's what an archive is. That's what a vault is. That's what a labyrinth is. This is why Hawara connects to the Hall of Records concept without feeling like a side quest. Because the Hall of Records isn't about one psychic or one prophecy. It's about a motif. It's about the human instinct to store knowledge against catastrophe. Civilizations always build archives. The Library of Alexandria. The Vatican archives. Modern data centers buried in mountains. Seed vaults in the Arctic. Knowledge survives when it's hidden, protected, and insulated from chaos. So if Atlantis was real, and if the Younger Dryas was the wound that destroyed it, then survivors would build an archive somewhere stable. Somewhere inland. Somewhere with priest-guarded access. Somewhere with climate control baked into geology. And Hawara is exactly that. A multi-level underground maze. Thousands of chambers. A surface structure that functions as administration to outsiders, while the deeper layers hold restricted material only the custodians can access. That matches the ancient testimony, and it matches the modern scan footprint. And the metal object at the center is the detail that turns Hawara from big building into purpose-built system. Because burial chambers don't need a central device. Administrative buildings don't need a central metal anomaly buried deep as the convergence point of a 4-level plan. A central object positioned at the deepest node of a labyrinth reads like a machine. Not a coffin. And now we fold this back into the emotional engine of the Younger Dryas. Because the end of that era wasn't gentle. It was violent change, it was rising water, it was migration, it was memory turning into myth. Flood stories appear across cultures because the experience was universal, and humans don't forget the sea swallowing their world. That's entropy. The arrow of time wiping away structures, dissolving coastlines, erasing cities, and forcing survivors to restart the story. But entropy doesn't erase everything equally. It destroys what is exposed first. That's why the underground matters. The underground is where you put what you refuse to lose. And Hawara is literally the underground wonder of the ancient world. The upper levels were the public face. The deeper levels were forbidden. For 2,000 years, nobody entered the lower chambers, because the priesthood treated them like a boundary line between normal society and something older. So when we say Atlantis in Egypt, we're not talking about cartoon sci-fi. We're talking about chain of custody. We're talking about priests acting like librarians. We're talking about a structure designed to keep outsiders out, not to honor the dead, but to protect the living memory of what came before. Now the tragedy. The real enemy isn't only Hawas. Hawas is a man. The real enemy is water. Hawara sits near a canal off the Nile, and centuries of irrigation raise the water table. Salt water creeps up into the underground and eats everything. It crystallizes in pores and cracks stone from the inside. It turns precision architecture into soft ruin. It dissolves the archive while humans argue over who gets to touch it. This is where the universe-level anchors come back, because it's the same truth at every scale. The Planck era is chaos so intense it defies our understanding, and the last drip of groundwater inside a buried chamber is that same chaos, scaled down to the daily grind. The universe expands. Systems decay. Entropy wins unless intelligence fights back with preservation. And that's what we're looking at right now. A buried wonder dissolving underwater while a gatekeeper blocks the world from confirming what ancient writers already confirmed with their own eyes. That's why the anger in the original script is justified. Because it's not just about ego. It's about time running out. Herodotus stood at the entrance to the underground chambers and was told no. Strabo described the labyrinth and walked away stunned. Pliny called it the original that Greece copied. Petrie found the footprint, then walked away thinking it was gone. But it was never gone. It was under him. And now, with the technology to see beneath the sand, we can map walls, levels, shafts, and central anomalies, and the world is still being told no. The same door. The same refusal. Different century, same priesthood logic, except now the priesthood is paperwork and permits and one man's grip on the story. Zahi Hawass isn't protecting history. He's protecting control. Because the moment Hawara gets opened, the timeline has to answer questions it has been dodging for a long time. Not just about Egypt, but about human civilization itself. About who built what. About what knowledge existed earlier than we admit. About what survived the flood. And that's why Hawara is the perfect episode for our series. It doesn't require us to wander the ocean looking for Atlantis. It gives us a target. A place. A buried system described by ancient witnesses, rediscovered by archaeology, confirmed by scans, and locked behind modern power. So here's the spine of the claim, said clean and strong. The labyrinth existed. The labyrinth still exists underground. Petrie found the roof. Modern scans mapped the walls. Later scans mapped deeper levels and a central metallic anomaly. The priesthood guarded the lower chambers because they were guarding knowledge. And Atlantis is the missing name for the civilization that needed to build that kind of vault. Because when a world-ending flood comes, you don't just rebuild temples. You rebuild civilization. You preserve the operating manual. You store the math, the astronomy, the medicine, the architecture, the measurements, the alignments, the techniques, and you hide it somewhere the surface chaos can't erase. A labyrinth is not just a maze. A labyrinth is a survival strategy. And Hawara is the place where the strategy is still waiting under the sand, under the salt, under the politics, behind a door that has been closed for 2,500 years. Not because there's nothing there, but because what's there changes the story. And if you feel the tension rising across this series, that's because it's the same tension that lives inside the cosmic background radiation itself. We can see the signal. We can map the shape. We can feel the outline of something real. But until someone opens the ground, the archive stays sealed, and humanity stays outside the door. For now. Huizi Ali, the man, the myth, the legend. The icon aka the Dark Lord. Hashtag Revolution 2025 Hashtag Chaos Rising 2025 Hashtag Southpaw Rebellion 2025 Hashtag Hawara Labyrinth Hashtag Atlantis Archive Hashtag Younger Dryas Atlantis